that our element of the day today is texture. So I'm going to repeat a couple things. Texture is the feeling of the surface of an object or the look of the feeling of the surface of an object. And while our other elements that we've learned, line, shape, form, value, are solely visual, meaning we take them in with our eyes, texture also appeals to our sense of touch, and the word for that is tactile. So when we're looking at this picture, or when I look at this picture of the like mussel shells with barnacles on them, if you've ever stepped on a mussel shell with barnacle on it, it's very unpleasant. So I have this sort of like ouch feeling, but you might think, oh, that looks rough, or that elephant looks dry, or you just get more of a sense of your subject if you see the texture of it.
When we were looking at the bird, you could just kind of feel how like
It would just be like sort of soft and smooth. And when we get close to a subject anyway, we have a more close experience with it, but the texture adds to that. Real texture, unlike form, which is never real in photography, sometimes you have real texture in photography, and that would be the surface of the paper that the picture is printed on. Or you could technically say that the screen would be the real texture of the photograph. But like back in the day when the only pictures you had of yourself were your school pictures, you could pay a lot of money to have those like weird brush strokes in your picture, or like that linen effect. And that would be real texture because it's the actual feeling. Most often, texture is going to be implied in photography. So if it looks like it has a specific feel, but it doesn't actually feel like the computer screen, then that texture is going to be implied. So implied texture, just like implied form, is when something looks different than it actually is. So implied form is when something looks three-dimensional but is actually flat. Implied texture is when something looks maybe like it's cold or sharp or bumpy, but it's actually a computer screen. So nearly all photographic texture is implied, meaning we can't reach out and touch the peeling paint, but we get the feeling that we could. And this is what adds to our experience of the object. So by getting close to your subject and seeing what the actual surface, the tactile surface feels like, would feel like that, you're adding to your subject's experience. Uniform texture is texture that creates a pattern. So that's where texture and pattern come together, is in uniform texture. Uniform texture is when something is when the feel of something is repeated over and over again. It's going to help unify your composition, but just like anything that's repeated over and over, it can be boring. So you want to break it up. So if each of these pictures, if you took one, they'd be great examples of uniform texture. They also look like a screen background. So by putting something else in there, you can break it up a little. How should we use texture? Well, in order to see texture, you must be close to your subject. Again, within a foot probably. And it's the simplest way to use texture is just to shoot it without any context. So taking a picture of this sweater that I'm wearing, I can see, the texture of the threads, and it's actually a uniform texture because the threads are going the same over and over again. By getting a little further away, so we still want to be close enough that we can see the texture, but by getting a little bit further away, we can actually add a little context and tell this story, if you will. So here's a picture where we're really close. We see these tire tracks, but by zooming out just a little bit, we can still see the tire tracks and get that sense of texture. But now we have the rest of the story. Oh, someone's taking a four-wheeler down the beach or whatever. Here, great picture of the texture of peeling paint, which is telling us that the thing is old. But by zooming out, we get a little bit more of a sense of like, oh, it's springtime and maybe it's morning and there's a dirty window. And so yes, this place is probably old, but there might be a little bit more to it. Lighting texture. So we will get more into lighting, but just like with form, lighting from the side, because what texture actually is the three-dimensionality of a surface. So by lighting from the side, we're almost always going to have the best capture of texture. Like these two, these two on the right are front lit, so they look flatter. To on the left, much more contrast because the lighting is getting caught on the places that are higher and getting trapped and not allowed into the places that are deeper. So here's lighting the tennis ball from the front. We don't see a lot of texture. We move it to the side a little bit. We get a little bit of the sense of texture. And then all the way from the side, we can see the bumps underneath the fuzziness. We can see the fuzziness. So side lighting is going to give us our maximum texture. Where do we find texture? Well, everything around us has texture. It's not always interesting. Excuse me. So starting with the ordinary, like I said, my fibers in my sweater, maybe the bark on the tree, and the mini project scavenger hunt I'm going to have you do today will help you sort of start looking for that. But if you're trying to think about texture, instead of taking a picture of your dog like regular, you've taken a million pictures of your dog, try to get the texture of your dog. So get closer. Maybe is their eye glossy? Do they have wiry hair? How can we make your dog look soft? Basically, getting closer to your subject is going to help you find more interesting texture. Alert. When you focus on the texture of human subjects, it's not necessarily the most flattering. So just like when we're talking about amping up the contrast isn't always flattering because we're making the darks darker, like your under eye circles, and the lights lighter. When you're taking pictures of humans, if you're like, oh, grandma, I want to capture your texture, that basically means, oh, I'm trying to get it so that there's like shadows in between your wrinkles and I can see your mustache hair. So it's not always going to be the most like flattering picture of a human to find the texture on them, but it will make it more interesting and tell a better story. So just FYI. So here's some texture at my house. Definitely need to clean my grill. I was actually not at my house. I was in Portland. But here, like, we have a lot of different textures here in a very small amount of space. And we don't need to watch the video.